What's up, Wildcatter Nation? Welcome back to the best show on the planet, Oil and Gas Startups.
The best oil and gas podcasts in the universe.
Ever. What's up, dude? We got Cash Blackburn.
What's going on?
I like Cash because you shared, we actually named my son after you. So
Oh, is that where it came from?
that's where it came from. I didn't want to tell anybody, but
It wasn't that good of a name in the 80s, but it's
it's
catching
making a
on now.
comeback.
It's catching on now.
It's making
It's coming back in
It was
style.
a 50-50 shot when that first came out. You know,
Which-
it could have gone two ways.
So do you have the same nicknames that he does? We call him, obviously Cash Money,
Cash
Right.
money, yep.
Little Peso.
No, not yet.
Yeah, we call
not
him Little
yet.
Peso. You be Big Peso.
You know, big peso,
You
yeah.
be Big Peso.
I get the, do you have any cash? That's the normal one. And I'm like, yeah, that was,
Yeah, you're like,
that
that's played
that's
out.
amazing. Great
It's-
one, you
yeah.
know?
It's like people calling me Colin. I'm like, oh shit, I haven't heard that before.
Yeah. So you get the atypical, but for the most part, it sticks. It sticks quite quickly.
We also call him Cashy Cash. We will call you that for the rest of the
Yeah,
podcast.
go for it, go for it.
We're just gonna call cash.
So you're
Cash.
yeah, Cashy Cash.
Also Cashy Cash.
So you're with Symmetry. You guys have deep roots in the oil and gas industry.
Correct. And I'll go through that. So Stallion Oilfield Services, right, is the overarching organization. And then from there spun out with that is
The
called-
Italian Stallion.
Exactly. And you have underneath that would be Starcom.
Okay.
And Starcom does have a deeper seated meaning, right? Stallion Remote Communications is where that initially came from. And through the years, we've organically grown Starcom to be one of the, premier upstream oil and gas connectivity solutions in the United States. And outside the output of that, of years of working in the cellular data collectively is Symmetry. So that's really the hierarchy of or the progression of where we are today.
Let's unpack all of that a
Yeah.
little bit because Stallion, when I think of Stallion, trailers, living quarters for
Span camps.
upstream. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've stayed in tons of Stallion trailers.
The orange, yep.
Yeah. I always think of the orange
Yeah.
horse logo. So you guys had that, and then was it Starcom?
Yeah,
Is that
so
what you said?
Starcom was a necessity of connectivity, right?
Yeah. So are we talking, satellite connectivity
All the
out
above.
on?
Yeah,
okay.
all the above. And so obviously you have the trailers, water, sewer, power generation, et cetera. The natural progression of that is connectivity.
How are you gonna watch Netflix out there?
Yeah, exactly,
Right?
exactly. So you have internet, and it traditionally, like you said, it came from VSAT.
Yeah.
You go back 10, 15 years, that was the only transport that we had to achieve connectivity in rural America, offshore,
Yeah.
Angola, you name it, right, across the world. It being in these rural environments, along came 3G, 4G, and the next evolution, 5G. That quickly, that paradigm quickly changed from VSAT to high-speed internet throughput, where you could, supply an entire rig with internet connectivity and high data speed throughput with directional antennas. And so there's just that natural progression and evolution that technology always pushes you forward. And so again, VSAT started off, but then as the tower started getting built out and connectivity started to be more abundant on the transport side, the demand was there, right? The consumers, obviously, oil and gas in this instance requires high speed transmission for real time data.
Mhm.
And the
More and
output of
more
that
every
was
day.
more and more every day. That's the general consumer around the world, right?
Yeah.
How we consume our data is just happening quicker and quicker and quicker, and the amount of bandwidth that we require to consume that data is just getting greater and greater. So that's really the evolution of Starcom and the connectivity. And Starcom does a lot more than just the transport layer, right? So and I know this about Symmetry, but to understand the roots, right, of where we are today. Starcom does, BDAs, right? So if there's no cellular connectivity at all, they can light up a 60, what we call a cow, a cell on wheels, 60-foot tower, 106-foot tower, take that cell phone signal from a tower that you would not be able to achieve service on and re-amplify that across the pad.
Set up a repeater.
Setting up a repeater.
Hey, that's
But
exactly what I used to do in the Marine Corps.
steroids.
On
Yeah.
steroids.
Yeah, on steroids.
Wait. So now dive into how is it on steroids?
So you have the traditional boosters, right?
Yeah.
Those the Wii boost, right? The Sure calls, things of that nature. Those will typically get put in the the housing and accommodations. This is an industrial repeater lighting up a whole pad. Now, compared to the military, no. I don't want to say compared to the military, it's better, right?
Hey, whenever you say military grade, that is not a compliment. That means it's the lowest
No,
the lowest bid from all your vendors, and it's all pieces of shit. So, I mean, we had some, comms, but the thing was that we had in our pockets iPhones that could do so much more than any of the comm equipment that we had there on site. The only difference was that was highly, highly encrypted.
Absolutely.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah,
No,
I mean,
agreed.
if you look at when I got in the oil field, started roughnecking 2010 timeframe, and the level of connectivity you had back then to what you have now, I would even say like within the last, let's call it 5 years,
Yep.
It's just really transformed, right? Used to it was like the adoption of technology was hamstrung by connectivity issues.
Yep.
And really,
Yep.
you don't hear about that. Like, no one really points to, oh, well, we don't have connectivity, so we can't run or deploy technology.
That's a good point. That used to be the number one thing. It was just like, well, why we have no connectivity? Now
Yeah.
that I stop and think about it, I haven't heard that mentioned.
Yeah, no one
once.
really talks about it
Yeah.
anymore.
And
Yeah.
it's much greater than data. It's an HSE issue, right?
Yeah.
If you can't make a phone call or you can't call for help, or and that we find that in construction all the time in remote, desolate areas where we get called out to put a cow cell on wheels, and just to put signal strength out there so they don't have to drive, a quarter mile or a mile up the road to be able to
Yeah.
call someone for
One of
safety.
my coworkers got his fingers cut off, and we didn't have cell phone signal. We just took his glove, had his fingers in it. We threw it in the back of a pickup and drove him to a hospital. We
Yeah.
didn't have cell phone signal to call anyone out in the middle of West Texas.
Yep.
So yeah, you talk about HSE impacts and being able to be connected and get help. That's huge.
It is. It's definitely it's a problem. And we rely on it, right? We rely on it so much, and so Starcom, out of Starcom, from there just came an abundance of data utilization, and from there that became a serious problem for us to manage. And I think if you have a transport on the cellular side greater than a single or a couple of zip codes that you operate out of, you can't, unfortunately just use a single carrier, right? There's particular hotspots, South Texas, right? Traditionally AT&T, West Texas,
Mhm.
traditionally Verizon. So you have these kind of stakes in the ground there where you really do have to use multiple carriers to achieve reliable connectivity.
Mhm.
And so we had this abundance of data that we had to manage, right? Just thousands of SIMs we had to manage. And this isn't a problem that's unique to us. And so we really looked at that and said, how do we make this more simple? It was taking up hours of time and labor we had to, so the quote unquote discounts achieved by said utilization, the output of that is us hiring an FTE to manage that data, right? It's a totally different problem now you have, is that you're supplementing costs from one side and moving it over to another. So it's really a wash at the end, right?
Yeah.
And really thought down and went into a think tank and said, this is such a serious problem for me. It cannot be unique across all industries, right?
Yeah.
And so we really, we hit the ground running in 2020. That's when that kind of think tank, and we started designing and implementing how we're going to strategize and accomplish this. And
It's the best year to start a new brand.
it is, it is. And so that's what we were really excited to launch Symmetry, which has been a great success. And we provide tier 1 carrier agnostic cellular data. So what we really do is we look at what do you need to complete that job or task, right, that you may have on your hands. And we listen to what that feedback is. And then we provide the best alternatives and the best options that you have at our capability and disposal, which is everything. We have a full portfolio of opportunities you can tap into.
So essentially, you guys are the turnkey kind of data provider for
Absolutely
any of the devices that a company may have. So just say you're an E&P or oilfield service company, you've got thousands of tablets and IoT.
I want to mine
sensor.
Bitcoin out in the middle of Wyoming. I can
that
call
is
you
getting
guys.
really big. Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
you
It
can.
is getting really big. That's
It
why I'm
is.
asking.
You can. And not only that, what I think is really cool and unique is traditionally when you're managing this data, you have to access multiple different platforms, right, from different carriers. And we've taken all that data and consolidated it into one single pane of glass. So you can see all of your utilization, all the carrier throughput, everything from each individual carrier in itself and see all that data at one time, which is just makes life a lot easier for you, right?
Yeah.
And if you're on the AP side, right, and you're worried about the finances, every bill, every carrier has a different bill cycle.
Yeah.
So you have to manage the 2nd, the 15th, the 30th, right? And you're managing all these different bill cycles, and we consolidate that as well. So
Oh,
it
nice.
just makes life just a lot easier for the consumer, for the people that are supporting that aspect of it within an organization.
Yeah.
Having
So
never like,
it's,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, because earlier before we got on the mic, we were talking about cutting the cable and getting rid of cable. And then kind of what happened from that, it was like, okay, you got Netflix, you got Amazon Prime, you got
Yeah,
Disney Plus and Hulu,
Yeah, I pay
and
more in streaming services. than I
yeah,
do for
yeah. Now we're
cable.
to that point where you pay more in streaming services. But it's just interesting that we were talking about that, because the way I see this is like, okay, you got all these different carriers, right?
yep,
And all right, if we have remote operations, especially like you brought up in Texas, like, okay, so you have South Texas, East Texas, West Texas, North Texas, and you may have stronger hotspots. So you know that you need to be leveraging other or a variety of carriers, but it's better to work with a intermediary like you guys that packages all, like, you interface with one
yep.
company, and essentially it's like, hey, let us bundle everything, provide services and infrastructure, and you only deal with us. You're not having to deal with AT&T and Verizon.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. In the grand scheme of things, right? It's one throat to choke, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I just
so
like
it's
what I find interesting, and kind of tying this back to cutting the cable and all the streaming services, is that it's like you almost see ebbs and flows of bundling and
Unbundling,
unbundling and then bundling
bundling.
back.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
it's really interesting if you stay on those patterns, like you can create businesses that it's like, oh, hey, there's a value proposition now to be, the one platform that, hey, we'll bundle all that for you and work with them. And then
yeah.
someday it's like, maybe you guys like, oh, it makes sense to, strip something off, but there's always just this constant tug of war of bundling and unbundling of services.
Correct, correct. And that was just the start, right? That was just the start of where we're at today. So on top of that, right, we do a firewall on the service, right, or firewall as a service. And what that allows you to do is do all their content filtering directly on the SIM, bandwidth managing, rate limiting, application layer shaping, right? So if you want someone
I'm
to
gonna be honest, like, I don't know
here
what
we go. You ready?
half those things
I'm gonna
are.
put I'm gonna
I
put
know what
this.
some of the words mean, but
I'm gonna put this down. Relax, so let's just say data consumed on a location could be 60% of that data could just be trashed, right? Crew morale data. And so if let's say 20% of that, 10% of that is just Facebook, videos, YouTube, right? It's going to allow you to throttle that down, that crew morale traffic down, and give your business class applications higher throughput, right? And so it
man,
gives
that's
you
what I
full
always
control.
be getting throttled on offshore rigs. Like,
I didn't say block. I don't want to do that, right? If I
trying to
get blocked,
download a Facebook video
I
or
will never get
something,
a
and it's
job. So
throttling me.
but you can block that content, right?
Yeah.
It allows you to shape and manipulate that data
Yeah.
however you want it, however you see fit. And then with COVID-19, it brought another challenge, right? Because now you had distance learning coming in, and that was really a hotbed of unfortunate, right? Of unfortunate events that occurred, and
Yeah.
you had IT staff that were traditionally, and I know we're shifting gears here, right? But it kind of speaks to how we got to that point of a firewall as a service standpoint on SIM cards, and you have IT staff that were depleted already, that were used to managing infrastructure local, like data centers, not remote field assets, right? And now these assets are going into the hands of someone who could be 5 years old, could be 15, could be 18 for distance learning. And so we had to layer on what's called SIPA content filtering, which is a Children's Internet Protection Act. So we have a lot of cool stuff that we bundle in with these SIMs that we can add on, right? So we have the default, right? Hey, you want data, but then we have on the private APNs that we can backhaul to your cloud instance or your data centers, and then we can do content filtering on top of that. So there's these other layers that, as we peeled back the onion, that we could massage this data and provide a better service than what
Yeah.
many have today.
So do you guys, with the new entity, is it focused on oil and gas specifically? Because when I think of Stallion,
Yeah.
I don't know if Stallion ever moved outside of oil and gas, or if it was just upstream oil and gas. I'm sure that there's other remote industries, construction or, traditional mining, things of that nature. So you guys focus on oil and gas, or they're adjacent verticals?
They're adjacent. I mean, obviously with our roots being in oil and gas, that's where most of our relationships started off. So we were able to leverage some of those relationships to say, hey, how does this sound, right? Kind of a proof of concept, a go-to-market. So our go-to-market before we even had our website up or anything was call our friends, right? That are in the industry and see what happens, right?
It's the best deployment strategy.
You have
Let's
to
call our friends.
You have to call your friends and say, what do you think, right? Does this sound appealing?
Can we talk about the story that you and I talked about prior, like how it further came about with the one client?
Yeah, go for it.
I don't know.
You want to talk about it?
Yeah, you talk about
All
it.
right,
I don't know
okay.
I don't know the story.
So I don't want.
I don't remember the story.
I'll butcher it.
I don't want to spill all the beans, so I'm not going to put out the name. So because I do plan to regurgitate or echo this conversation at Energy Tech Night, right?
Yeah.
But the root of everything is we were talking to a client, a large service provider in the oil field, and so we're sitting down with this individual who's very well known in the IT community, and they said, "Here's the deal, right? We do everything ourselves. We have all of our own hardware. We have all of our own technicians. We do everything ourselves, right? How could you possibly help me?" Kind of a slap in the face, right? And so you kind of, swallow your pride a little bit. I appreciate it.
Challenge accepted.
Challenge accepted. And we like to call it the Pepsi challenge, right? We'll take that Pepsi challenge, right? And that's what was the motivating factor for us to get into the think tank and say, okay, how do we help someone who already has it all, right? Who already, they have the IT staff, they have the data centers, they have the software, the connectivity, and really they just do everything in-house, right? Where do we know that their pain points are? Because if you're doing that and you're in the same field as us, we know you have the same problem we did. And that's where the output of that was Symmetry. And it's been so far an amazing experience and probably one of the best decisions we've made. Is really starting this and bringing this to light.
It's kind of interesting to think about the evolution of Stallion. Because when I think of Stallion, like I told you, it's like trailers, which is great business, but not a sexy business.
Nope.
There's nothing sexy about trailers and shitters out on location, but
pretty upset if you don't have them though.
Yeah,
that's very
definitely
true.
Definitely sucks if you don't have them. But then you move into data transmission and connectivity, through satellite or whatever it may be, and then it just keeps evolving until you become more. It's like an evolution from a trailer company to more of a tech and telecoms, provider. So it's really interesting to hear about that transition.
Didn't Clayton Williams get into telecom back in the day? That's kind of random. I was just thinking about that.
Don't put me on the spot like that. I don't know. I don't know if he did or not.
I thought everybody from Midland knew his story. I don't
know. Actually, we had someone who wasn't on the show. It was Panther, wasn't it? Panther. They had one of their dads was at Stallion.
I think he was the founder of Stallion. Who's the founder of Stallion?
You're gonna put me on the spot.
We're gonna put you on the spot now. Yeah, Cash about to be fired if you can't answer.
Cameron, do you know? Cameron's on.
There you
Craig
go.
Johnson. Okay.
Yeah.
What was his name?
I can't remember. But
Gallio.
I know Stallion. I think Stallion's been through a couple of acquisitions, but yeah, he was the founder of it.
That's the one part you're gonna cut up, by the way.
We gotta cut it. He's like, you can't fucking embarrass me like that on here.
Look, this is the first land-based oil and gas company that I've worked for, right? This is it's always been offshore.
Oh, really?
North Sea, Norway, Azerbaijan, Angola, Brazil, providing offshore telecoms around the world.
Really?
So this was a considerable leap for me, coming back stateside, right?
Yeah.
And getting into what, man, I was sorely wrong when I thought, wow, if I could do offshore, what's West Texas?
Yeah.
Man, I greatly underestimated that one.
Talk about that a little bit. Like why, like, I think that it's easy to make that assumption. Like if I can do offshore, because if you have worked offshore and land, like, I mean, it's two different worlds. Like I remember,
Completely.
I grew up on land, and then when I went offshore, I was like, holy shit, this is so much more professional out here.
Offshore, yes. I mean,
What challenges did you see, going into a West Texas or a land environment that, I think one thing that sticks out to me is what you do with less resources on land compared, offshore has a lot of money behind it. And so
agreed.
you have access to resources out in land like you don't get that big of a budget.
Everything is very thoughtful and thorough offshore.
Yeah.
You do a lot of factory activation test. Everything's tested and then tested again.
Mhm.
Every nut bolt before it's deployed, right? Because that helo flight or that boat or what have you, that's a considerable downtime, right? There's all
Mhm.
sorts of economic repercussions and everything else along the way. So, um, on the land side, I was just, it was pure ignorance, right? I was so used to having power. At 110, 220, like, it
Yeah.
was so that was the basic questions. I was
Yeah.
so used to just having power, that was an abundance. I was just and then, hitting West Texas, they're all the basins, right? That's a serious problem. It's
Yeah.
just getting power and connectivity and, resources and the constant moves, right? It was just everything's just, every couple of weeks just moving, changing, moving, and your gear's just getting beat up and beat up and beat up, right? Offshore for the most part, you can install something, right? Make sure it's IP66 rated offshore, like salt water and everything else it's not going to be corroded, and
Mhm.
everything goes into a nice, equipment rack, and it just, for the most part, it's there,
Like I
right?
said, it's
Yeah,
professional.
it's
It's like people are
very
on top of their
professional.
stuff. Yeah.
And once you get that installed down, I mean, you may have your incidents every now and then, but for the most part, it's pretty stable. And then in West Tech, your gear just gets beat up. It's just the wear and tear on the gear, the constant change and moving
Mhm.
and power, and it's very taxing when you think of, um, the absence of the level of sophistication and what challenges that brings in itself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that to me was a serious challenge.
Yeah, to be honest, every time I go on a deep water drill ship, I'm just like amazed by ingenuity and human engineering. But it's a different level of engineering because you go off or you go back on land and you have some workover rig hand that just figures out how to do something. You're like, damn, that's genius. But
Yeah,
they do it out of necessity because there's just a lack of resources, right? And they
yeah.
just figure out how to get it done. So it's funny because there's ingenuity on both sides, but it comes in different shapes and forms. But I was always I think I went on my first offshore rig in 2014 and was kind of blown away because back then in 2014, I mean, the connectivity issue for land assets was, I mean, I feel like that was kind of the thick of it. Like people were starting to look at SaaS based software
Yep.
and IoT, but connectivity was a barrier to that. Then you go offshore and it's just like, man, you're out in the middle of the ocean and you have great comms, you have great internet connectivity. And we're out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And so I always thought that that was interesting that offshore seemed to figure that out, but land was still struggling at the time.
Yeah, it's when I first started off, just get out of the military, in '06.
Hmm.
Started off doing satcoms for a commercial, company, and, the high tech was 128 by 128, kilobits per second.
Hmm.
Uh, that was high tech, right? And 2
Yeah.
phone calls would take up half that link. So if they were literally on the phone both at the same time,
Kick you off.
they had 64K left over, right? I mean, it was and that was high speed at the time, and the guys just loved it, right? And they still use fax machines, right? The Pitney Bowes. So they call him, my faxes aren't working. I remember that, like FXO cards and FXS cards. And it was just, I remember like
there's people who are listening who have no, like some
yeah,
of the younger,
no.
the younger
I
like
get it, right?
graduates, like they have no clue what dial-up is.
Yeah,
Like,
I know.
They don't know the struggle, man.
So the struggle's real. And now, people would gawk at a 128K link, right?
Yeah.
It just wouldn't even be a thing because really all they needed it for at the time was to send reports. I'm going to send a report in the morning. I'm going to send a report in the evening. And then I might call in to let them know I'm okay. And it was really, it was still simple at that time. And now you just have so much telemetry, SCADA, real-time data, video, analytics. I mean, all the decision-making, as you see the data side, all the decision-making or the majority of the decision-making is now being made onshore, right? In real-time operation centers or as much as possible.
Yeah.
And that goes for, GOM or land, right? If they can, even at a company that I'm familiar with, Oceaneering, right? They're working on a remote pilot program to actually drive the ROV from shore, right? So if I can take a senior technician and allow him to drive 3 or 4 ROVs in a day instead of being on one rig.
Houston Megatronics
right?
is doing the same
It's
thing.
just optimization, but
yeah.
the data that's required to accomplish that is enormous.
Yeah.
And it's a necessary evil, right? To progression is the data side. And that, if you take that piece lightly, you'll stumble, right? More than you're successful. And a lot of people do try to do it themselves, and I commend them for that. And some people can be successful, right? They may get lucky. But for the most part, if you're in moving environments, changing, and like I said earlier, right, it's going to be very complicated. The customers we talk to today are that do have challenges, right? That we'll talk about their antenna setup, and we'll go through and we'll ask, what are you using, right? And well, I'm using an omnidirectional, right? And that's just the basically the stick, right? It's not really pointed at anything; it just radiates in a circle. And we highly recommend right off the bat, go directional antenna, particularly in desolate areas. Okay? Find that nearest tower, learn how to tune in your antenna. And they said, yeah, but what happens when I move? Do it again and again and again. Because if not, if you try to do a subpar solution, it's just going to cause you more problems than anything else.
Yeah, that makes sense. So for you guys, I mean, are y'all mainly focused, sounds like your background, you have a lot of international experience overseas, and I'm sure this problem extrapolates across the entire world. There's
Absolutely.
remote locations all over the world.
Yeah.
Do you guys deploy the technology and the services internationally right now, or do y'all mainly focus in the U.S.?
Primarily, we're in the U.S. We can support Canada and Mexico, and we do have global roaming SIMs that are multi-IMSI that we can deploy on small IoT and SCADA devices, which allows you to basically take the device anywhere, any country in the world almost, and deploy and obtain connectivity.
Cool.
Which is really unique because that's a single SIM card that does that.
Yeah,
that requires no swapping out of any SIMs. Because there's a bigger problem on the global supply chain side, right? Most of the equipment is not manufactured here in the States, right? It's going to be outsourced somewhere else and then brought in. And then sometimes you don't know if this lot or SKU is going to end up in the US or if it's going to end up in Canada, if it's going to, right? And maybe you can control the supply chain side, maybe you can't. But for the most part, putting in particular carrier SIMs into the devices is very painful logistically. And so we do have a multi-carrier, multi-IMSI capability set that again it's resourceful in the small data sets.
Yeah.
Once you get into big data, 4K video streaming, things that nature, you're going to need tier 1 connectivity.
Yeah,
which goes back to the native carriers.
So we only got a few more minutes. I'm gonna get super meta in this last question.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm just kind of curious. You get a lot of comm experience. What do you think, like 10, 20 years from now, like what is the future of telecommunications? Because we're seeing, it seems like every episode we talk about some sort of decentralization. You're seeing everything being decentralized. And at the same time, you see the ISPs essentially holding and wielding so much control. And, prior to us recording, we were talking about how like it's, having a cell phone and having data access, almost like a utility now. And it's very hard to live kind of a modern life, at least in this country, without some sort of like cell phone or device to be able to like communicate and to do a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of like where we headed, 5, 10, 20 years from now?
I think that personally is where you're at. The evolution is not the same for each individual person geographically,
Yeah.
right? You could be in Appalachian Mountains and all you want is internet connectivity. You could be in Houston and you're getting 5G millimeter wave, right? So that evolution in itself is I think we're going to see everything's connected in some form or fashion, right? And you'll hear the word IoT thrown around a lot: machine to machine gateways, connectivity. You know, as we move more towards autonomy, and bridging that digital divide, I see like the Leos, right? I'm excited, really excited about that. And a lot of people are, well, doesn't that take away from cellular? Sure, but it gives you another endpoint into the Internet of Things, right? So Leo is
What's Leo?
I'm sorry,
What is Leo?
your Starlinks, your
Starlink,
OneWebs.
yeah.
Okay.
That's all Leo, right? And Leo's been around,
That's
right?
what I was about to ask
But
you
not in the
next,
data
is like,
capacity that it's potentially going to be at here in the near future.
yeah,
So I'm really excited about that because that opens up so many possibilities for other things to occur
yeah,
with the connected devices. So
hmm
I mean, it really comes down to autonomy, bandwidth, data transfer, and reduced latency. Once that occurs and you can get your data in real time, sub 50 millisecond latency, it's going to be a game changer for what's out there in the world today. Right now, it's just a problem with the digital divide of you have people that can't even get connectivity at all. So
yeah. I mean, that's what a couple days ago on the podcast, I had Jai Energy, a big Bitcoin mining outfit up in Wyoming, and was talking to them because someone asked me the other day, like, hey, what speed and bandwidth do you need for mining out on remote locations? And it's like, I don't think it's much of a speed, it's much of it is a latency
yeah,
issue. And I think about, like Starlink coming out and what that just enables, one, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And I saw this tweet from Elon Musk the other day. I can't remember exactly what the tweet was, but essentially the gist of it, someone was asking about like, how do you deal with regulators that, want to have kind of control on the internet? And his answer was they can shake their fists at the sky. And I thought that was badass. Like they can't do anything if you're broadcasting it, from space. So
yeah,
I think that will open up a lot of opportunity with remote operations and these just kind of desolate places. But you know, it's also got to be proven out
uh,
too, right? And like
yeah.
that's interesting that you said Leo's. It's been around for a while. I didn't know that.
Iridium's a Leo solution,
Yeah, I
right? So
didn't.
if you're on the
Yeah,
top of a mountain, you click up your little cell phone, right? It's just the throughputs wasn't there, right?
yeah,
It's not. There's decent throughput, right? But nowhere near the type of speeds that Starlink's looking at, or
yeah,
OneWeb,
yeah.
or any other solution like that. It's it's unique in the sense of the amount of bandwidth and throughput that you'll be able to achieve on that capacity.
Yeah, just like I mean, say Starlink took off
Yeah.
and it works. I mean, how does that, how does that affect y'all's business and your model? I mean, I guess some would argue like, oh, this is going to displace
No.
everything in remote comms, but I don't know shit about communications. So,
Yeah, in this space, you have to be somewhat of a chameleon, right? Everything's going to change, right? The same thing could have been said about VSAT 10 to 15 years ago,
yeah.
where what are you going to do when cellular comes out, right?
Yeah.
And here we are, right?
Yeah.
And so you adapt and you
hmm
overcome and you actually accept those challenges and you say, how can I use this to further the advancements of connectivity?
Yeah.
It's the consumer that drives that, not you, right?
hmm
And so if the consumer is looking for better reliability, connectivity, and better services and throughput, and let's do it, right? And if there's a capacity and a means to make that happen, we see that as an opportunity, not a threat. And
Yeah.
and I think if you're in the technology space, it's every day's evolving. There's
Yeah.
always something cool that is just around the corner that you have to keep your ear to the ground on, and 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 think how could you leverage this to provide a better service to your current
Yeah.
customers.
I mean, this conversation is really interesting to me because I think about the world and connectivity and the positive impacts that it has. And it's funny enough because you yourself, you don't have any social media accounts, but we were literally talking about this before we got on the mic of, people they're like, oh, crime's just going up. It's like, no, well, you just, you see it being live streamed
Yeah, it's
in
the way you
real time
consume your
on
data.
Twitter.
Yeah,
But I mean, there's plenty of data that shows that the world's becoming a better place.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think, if you look at war, like war is, I mean, it's abysmal, right? Like it is the worst thing that can happen on the planet. And war is trending down. And I think that it trends down over time as the world becomes connected. we start understanding people across the world, they understand us, we're able to share, culture, knowledge. So connectivity, I think, is just a massive contributor to progress in the world. And so kind of hear like the technical aspect of like, hey, how do we actually connect? Like, how do we do it?
Yeah,
I think that's, and it's just kind of funny that you're off of social media because you're like the man when it comes to connectivity, but like, I'm not going to connect with anyone. No,
No, look,
so I'm gonna make it where y'all can connect.
If you want to know how I'm doing, right, you have my number. You know how to get a hold of me. Text
like,
me.
You can damn sure call me.
Yeah, you can call me, right? I think it's very passive and it's the most. It's very unsocial, right?
Yeah.
I think I have my 20-year reunion coming up, and I just think, why are we doing this, right? Like, I know what you had for dinner last night, just the way information is shared. So it's changing the way, and I'm not against it. I just refuse not to participate in it for the time being.
That makes sense.
I like these conversations better.
Hell
right?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense. But yeah, I'm excited to see, I didn't even realize it until we started talking about it. But I was like, man, I haven't heard anyone bitch about connectivity issues being the barrier. Like it kind of woke me up. Like that's something that we used to hear even on the early days of the podcast. People talked about that, and just don't hear about it anymore.
I used to have to, like, we had to so back in the day with GDS, where we had to completely rewrite our field data capture application to hold more data in an offline mode, because we were literally, the client that we were working with had wells out in Utah, out on the Indian lands, and there was like not shit for connectivity. Right. So we had to capture like months and months of production data, pressures, all sorts of stuff.
Yep.
And being able to store it in offline mode in Chrome on an iPad, and then being able to upload whenever.
And that goes to the talking point of there's more options, right? So you can have a couple of different tier 1 carrier providers in your cellular modem, and then have a backup VSAT, right? Yeah. Or vice versa, right? However you want to run your network. And so, you look back, you were more single threaded. So if that one carrier if that one service went down, there were no other options. So there's just those options open up a lot more opportunity for more stable and resilient connectivity. So
Cool, man. So if people want to check out Symmetry, where can they find you guys? You have a dedicated, I mean, you said you launched the product before you had a website, so I'm assuming you have a website now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Symmetry.com, Simetry.com.
All right, cool.
And then if you want to get a hold of us by phone, 1-833-Symmetry. Again, that's Simetry.
I would usually say, and we'll put his LinkedIn URL in the show notes, but I can't say that this time, so you can't find him. you
call that number, right? You hit the sales team.
All right.
Say you want to talk to Cash. I'm here.
Right. I'm open the phone book.
Yeah, do it the old-fashioned way.
Get a hold of me.
I love it, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. That was a really interesting conversation.
Hey, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. By the time this goes out, I think it'll go out right around ETN. We have Energy Tech Night Midland on October 18th at Yucca Theater. If you haven't signed up, it's going to be awesome. We got 6 different companies presenting. And we've got ETN Houston on October 27th, the very next week. Symmetry is going to be there. They're going to be presenting. So if you actually want to see the technology live, or you just can't find Cash's email, or you can't reach out to him, you can catch him in person. So everybody can bombard him there at the Heights Theater, October 27th. We'll see you guys there. Catch you in the next episode.